There are places on this earth where silence itself feels older than the stars, where the air presses in with a weight that is almost liquid. Imagine yourself standing before a low, unassuming hill in the Indian state of Bihar, the morning mist still clinging to the ancient rock like a forgotten shroud. Before you, carved directly into a monolithic granite ridge, is a dark, geometric mouth opening into the planet's deepest memory. This is not a palace of elaborate pillars or soaring spires. It is a doorway of polished, unyielding stone, impossibly preserved after 2,000 years. You are about to enter the Barabar Caves, and once you step inside, the very concept of sound will break apart and rebuild itself in a language you do not understand. The first thing that strikes you is the perfection of the surface, a mirror-like polish on the granite walls that seems to swallow the light from your lantern hole. Your footsteps slow as the echo returns to you, not as a curt reply, but as a long, hanging hum that trembles in the bones of your chest. This is no natural cavern worn away by patient water. This is a hyper-dimensional instrument chiseled from the solid cliff by hands that demanded mathematical precision. The Mauryan Empire carved these chambers around 250 years before the Common Era, under the patronage of the Emperor Ashoka, a king touched by grief and a hunger for spiritual clarity. Yet, the question that haunts the long humming darkness is not who built this sanctuary, but why they needed a room that could hold a single note suspended in the air for almost half a minute. As you run your fingers over the cold vitrified stone, you are not just touching a wall. You are touching a frozen sound wave, a geological intent we have yet to fully decipher. The interior of the Lomas Rishi cave, with its arched ceiling shaped like a perfect slice of a cylinder, acts as a colossal resonance box that defies the decay of sound. Stand at the threshold where the morning sun struggles to pierce the thick, ancestral shadow, and listen to the sound of your own breathing as it separates into a shimmering, metallic overtone. We have become accustomed to dismissing the ancients as superstitious. But this is a level of acoustic engineering that requires a profound grasp of wave physics. To understand the depth of the riddle, we must first separate the stone from the myth, examining the physical evidence that refuses to fit a simple explanation. The Barabar complex consists of several chambers scattered across the twin hills of Barabar and Nagarjuni, dressed in that same baffling, high-gloss finish. A standard chisel on granite leaves a rough scar, a testimony to the violence of the strike. Yet these walls feel like a liquid that froze in an instant. Geologists have confirmed that the rock is granite gneiss, an exceptionally hard material teeming with quartz and feldspar crystals, nightmarish to shape with iron tools. The ancient masons achieved a surface roughness that rivals modern machine-polished stone, a feat that has forced stonemasons and engineers to scratch their heads in disbelief. Inside the Sudama cave, the rectangular antechamber focuses the low-frequency reverberation into a physical sensation that vibrates directly through the skull. The narrative of mainstream history expected to find crude hammer marks or devotional clumsiness, the honest, jagged edges of a forgotten faith. Instead, we are confronted with a geometric sanctum where the corners are sharp enough to cut paper, blocking the escape route of any stray sound wave. It is as if the builders were not carving a room, but tuning a monumental tuning fork to a frequency that carries far beyond the range of simple human speech. The polishing technique is not merely about aesthetics. It creates a non-porous seal that stops acoustic energy from being absorbed by the stone's rough grain. Every single sound pulse from a low chant to a soft whistle, is reflected back into the center of the chamber with almost perfect efficiency, clustering into a standing wave. The visual cues are stark and unapologetic. A worn stone floor reflecting the curved arch, a pinpoint of blackness in the domed ceiling where the sound might escape to the heavens. Long before seismographs and oscilloscopes, the Ajivika ascetics who meditated here wrapped themselves in this cathedral of reverberation, seeking to dissolve the self inside the drone of the universe. The air inside is stagnant, holding the breath of 100 generations, waiting to be activated by the vibration of a human mantra or a toneless hum. Where the evidence of physics ends, the labyrinth of speculation begins, drawing us into a maze of lost technology and spiritual alchemy that challenges the arrogance of modern certainty. Some researchers theorize that the Om's syllable, chanted within these polished arcs, creates a harmonic cascade that physically stimulates the pineal gland deep within the brain. Local whispers have long held that the caves are not inert shelters, but channels, places where the veil between the material world and a resonant cosmic field grows dangerously thin. A darker hypothesis suggests that the builders inherited a fragmented blueprint from a vanished precursor civilization, a map of sound geometry that the Mauryans only partially understood. You must consider the impossibility. An echo that lasts an unnaturally long time is not a haunting. It is a data stream lingering in the air, waiting for a sensory organ to decode it. The rational mind tries to shrink the enigma, labeling it a whispering gallery effect, a neat trick of physics that just happened to be carved by accident in granite 1,000 times harder than plaster. But the placement of the Karanchapar cave demonstrates intent, aligning its entrance not just with the sunrise, but with a specific angular reflection point that prevents audio dispersion. It is a spiral of reasoning that leads nowhere. If the purpose was purely monastic protection from the monsoon rain, why carve a doorway that funnels sound like a megaphone into the earth? We are left holding the fossilized skeleton of a technology that is simultaneously architectural, musical, and deeply neurological, suspended in the amber of Indian antiquity. The contrast is dizzying. Just outside the cave, birdsong scatters into chaotic noise, but inside, a single drop of water hitting the floor creates a clear, ringing bell tone that seems to ascend. Footprints vanish into snow easily, but here, the evidence is a physics experiment set in stone that refuses to degrade, mocking the entropy that consumes other ruins. To step into the labyrinth is to face the theory of lithophones, the idea that certain massive stone structures were meant to be struck and played like living geological instruments. Strike the inner wall of the Visva Zopri cave with a wooden mallet, and you will not hear the dead thud of rock, but a low, gong-like bloom of sound that radiates outward. The clockwork of the mind tries to calculate the math involved, the precise tensile strength, the exact radius of the arch, the specific density of the granite needed to sustain a 20-second reverb. Mainstream archaeology points to a painstaking process involving hand polishing with sand and sapling posts, a grinding regime that would take a generation to complete a single vault. Yet, the patience required borders on the pathological. It is the obsession of a mind that sees the stone not as an obstacle, but as a sleeping voice they needed to wake. There is a comfort in believing history is a solved puzzle, until you stand at the edge of this silence and realize that no modern power tool can easily replicate that gloss on an undulating, curved ceiling. Think of the sand flowing through the hourglass. These caves represent a moment where the sand stopped, crystallizing a lost understanding of the link between vibration and matter. Some acousticians have mapped the resonant frequency of the chambers and found a dominant note that sits eerily close to the infrasound frequency of a heightened meditative trance state. It is as if the room itself is a generator designed to push the biological oscillation of the human brain away from the noise of the waking world and into a deep delta wave silence. The labyrinth grows darker when you consider the ancient weapons of sound, the mythic horns that brought down walls. Stories our grandfathers called fairy tales, but which quantum physics might call resonance catastrophe. Could these caves be a safe harness for that power, a sacred amplifier that dematerialized the ego without shattering the stone? Skeptics dismiss this as spiritual romanticism, a projection of our own hunger for the supernatural onto the practical drudgery of stonecutters who simply sought shelter for their masters. Yet, the fragmentation of old records points toward a ritual where light and sound combined, where a fire lit in the corner cavity would carry the voice of the priest on the thermal currents in a ghostly, disembodied way. We are not finding easy answers. We are finding mirrors that reflect our own limited sensory bandwidth back at us. The human element is driven not by the stone, but by the madness of the seeker who falls into this mystery and cannot climb out again. Visitors describe a physical dread, a palpable shift in atmospheric pressure as they enter the Gopika cave, the feeling that the air itself is listening. The archaeologists who chart these chambers speak in hushed, defensive tones, unable to reconcile the geometric perfection of the ark with the crude tools displayed in museum cases nearby. There is a psychological toll that this polished granite takes on the observer, a subtle panic arising from the fact that your own voice returns to you from all directions simultaneously. You try to listen to the past, pressing a modern microphone against the 2,000-year-old polish, recording the impulse response of a space that seems engineered for a non-human voice. Teams have spent years lost not in the physical caves, but in the data they produce, staring at spectral analysis charts that show a perfect harmonic decay curve, a pure mathematical fall of sound. We must ask ourselves why a simple hermit would require an acoustic environment that would rival the finest symphony hall built by the physicists of the 20th century. The obsession grows when you realize the polish was not a functional necessity for hearing. A rough cave echoes too, but a rough cave scatters the soul of the sound, losing the higher spiritual frequencies to the chaos of diffusion. This was architecture as spiritual warfare, a clean, polished shield against the entropy of the outside world, a womb of pure order in the midst of the jungle. The local guardians of the site have long folded the mystery into the fabric of legend, speaking of the celestial architect Vishwakarma, who shaped the caves with light rather than steel. It is easier to look at a god than to look at the terrifying truth of human capability, a truth which suggests that our ancestors possessed a mastery over the material world that we were foolish enough to abandon. The shadow of the mountain falls over the courtyard, but inside there is only the perfect, unyielding darkness and the sound of your own blood pulsing in your ears. The ashes of the fire pits are long cold, swept away by the winds of the centuries, yet the instrument remains, still tuned, still waiting for a hand or a voice that knows the forgotten melody. Where science fails to replicate the technique of vitrified granite without massive industrial heat, the imagination steps in, freighting the caves with the idea of geopolymers or softened stone. The human obsession with these caves reveals more about us than about the Mauryan architects, We are desperate for proof that the ancient world was not a cold, dark waiting room for our own brilliance. Expeditions seeking to record the perfect note often leave in silence, their recordings failing to capture the somatic reality. The way the sound pressure physically massages the skin. You will find sketches of these curves in the notebooks of engineers who have spent years trying to reverse engineer geometry that a stonemason apparently drew in the dirt with his heel. We are terrified by the silence of history, because if we admit that a culture mastered sound to such a degree 2 millennia ago, we must also admit that they knew something about consciousness we have forgotten. The relics we usually find are swords and broken pottery, testaments to violence and sustenance. Here, the relic is a sensation, an immaterial ghost of harmony that vanishes the moment you stop the chant. It is a maddening loop. To verify the theory, you must produce the sound, but the sound changes your perception of the very reality you are trying to measure. Standing in the center of the square chamber, you become the missing component of the machine, the biological soft tissue vibrating in sympathy with 1,600 tons of ancient polished granite. The stars wheel overhead unseen, but perhaps the cave was aligned with that celestial clockwork, a resonator for the silent music of the spheres that Pythagoras could only dream of hearing. The abyss of time swallows all things softer than stone, and so only the hardest question remains. Not how they did it, but what they heard when they succeeded. We are left staring into that black, arched emptiness, and the emptiness stares back, humming a tone that sounds like a very low D-sharp, the note of eternity. The fog of history obscures the faces of the master builders. We do not know their names, we do not know the schooling of their ears, and we never will. This is the ultimate allure of the unknown, the reason we walk into the darkness of the cave, to feel our own heartbeat synchronize with a rhythm that is not coming from the present, but from the deep past. There is no translation software for the resonance of granite. The data is tactile, a language built purely for the sensory body of a meditating monk who has silenced his conscious mind. The enduring enigma is this: these caves are not just empty stone pockets in a hill. They are functional artifacts of a lost science of human biological tuning. We have imaged the interiors with LiDAR. We have modeled the sound waves in silicon processors, and yet we cannot feel what they felt because we are listening with our ears alone, not our souls. The wind moves through the door, stirring the dust, and for a fleeting second, the cave seems to breathe, a long, slow inhalation that builds a pressure on the eardrums. If this journey into the silent chapters of history has captured your mind, look again at the concept of a ruin. A ruin is not an ending, but a pause in a transmission. The message is still embedded in the parabolic curve, waiting for the listener who is sensitive enough to decode the silence that exists between the echoes. We are haunted by the Barabar finish because it does not behave like stone. It behaves like frozen water, like a mercury mirror that time forgot to oxidize. The ultimate riddle is not acoustic. It is psychological, a test of our willingness to accept that the apex of human technology might be a simple, empty room that makes the void audible. You may forget the dates and the dynasties, but you will never forget the moment your own voice came back to you, transformed, sacred, and utterly alien. We search for answers in the stars, in the abyss of the ocean. But the deepest secret was carved into a granite hill in Bihar, hiding in plain sight under the monsoonal clouds. The clock of civilization ticks forward, but inside the cave, there is no time, only the dying fall of a vibration that refuses to fully surrender to silence. They created a place where a thought becomes a A word becomes a sound, and a sound becomes a physical force that can outlast the man who uttered it for half a minute. Perhaps that is the true definition of an ancient miracle, not a bending of natural law, but a mastery of it so total that it appears to our lesser sight as pure magic. You walk out into the blinding sun, and the noise of the world rushes back in, but a part of you remains trapped in that resonance chamber, humming the frequency of the unknown. The echo of the Barabar Caves does not die. It simply descends below the threshold of human hearing, vibrating in the stone floor long after you have gone home. We have mapped the world, but we have not yet mapped the sound of silence. And in that silence, beneath the hills of Barabar, the sleeping giant of ancient acoustics still dreams, waiting for a voice to wake it.